Let me tell you about one of the most memorable ESL classes I have ever had, and not in a good way. I had a Japanese female student who wanted help making her requests sound more polite in English because she was about to visit a friend in Europe. That sounds reasonable enough on the surface. Help a student communicate more politely with a foreign friend. Simple enough lesson, right?
Wrong.
What unfolded over the next 25 minutes was one of the most jaw-dropping displays of one-sided thinking I have encountered in years of teaching, and I have encountered a lot. Here is the situation the student described. Her friend living in Europe had recently been injured and was having difficulty walking. Despite this, the friend had offered to travel by train, a significant distance, to pick up this student from the station upon her arrival. Not only that, but the friend was using her day off to do this, which meant she was giving up personal time that she would otherwise have spent with her own family, including her daughter. By any reasonable measure, this friend was going above and beyond. She was injured, she was sacrificing family time, and she was still showing up. Most people would respond to that level of generosity with deep gratitude and a strong desire not to add any more burden to someone who is already clearly going out of their way. This student's response was the exact opposite. What she wanted help with, the reason she booked the lesson, was how to phrase her demands more politely. And the demands were these. She wanted her friend to keep checking and updating her on the exact arrival time because she could not stand the idea of her friend arriving either too early or too late. She wanted precise timing from someone with an injury who was traveling by train on her day off to do a favor that nobody asked her to do, but that she offered out of genuine kindness. I want to be clear about what I did in that class before I share my reaction, because I am aware that as a tutor my job is to help the student communicate, not to judge their personal relationships. So, I did what any responsible teacher would do. I asked probing questions. I tried to understand if maybe I was missing context. Perhaps the friend had specifically said timing was important to her. Perhaps there was a logistical reason for the precision request that made more sense than it appeared on the surface. I asked. I listened. I genuinely tried to find the charitable interpretation because jumping to conclusions about a situation you are only hearing one side of is not fair, and it is not good teaching. But the more questions I asked, the clearer the picture became. There was no logistical necessity. There was no special context. The student simply expected a high level of service from her friend, the kind of attentiveness and precision that you might expect from a professional driver or a scheduled transport service, from a person who is injured, traveling out of personal generosity and sacrificing time with her own child to be there. I even gently implied, through the kind of careful indirect question that you learn to use in these situations, whether the student planned to compensate her friend in any way for the trouble, a gift, a meal, some acknowledgement of the significant effort involved. The answer was essentially no. This was just what she expected. That was the moment I laughed.
I want to be honest about that.
I tried not to. I held it together for as long as I could. But at a certain point, the gap between what this student considered a reasonable request and what any outside observer would consider an enormous imposition on an injured, generous person sacrificing family time became too wide to absorb with a straight face. I laughed. The student gave me 1 star. And honestly, looking back on it, I understand why. She came for help making her demands sound polite, and instead got a tutor who could not fully conceal the fact that the demands themselves were the problem, not the phrasing. This class is a useful entry point into a conversation that ESL tutors, customer service workers, and really anyone who regularly interacts across cultural lines will find familiar. The experience of encountering a request that is framed as reasonable by the person making it, but that reveals, on examination, a significant gap in how that person understands reciprocity, generosity, and the appropriate limits of what you can expect from people who care about you. This is not exclusively a Japanese phenomenon. Entitlement exists in every culture and every nationality. But there is a specific version of it that shows up occasionally in Japanese students that is worth understanding because it is shaped by cultural context in a particular way. Japanese consumer culture, as we have discussed in other videos, operates on extremely high service standards. When you are in Japan as a customer, the level of attentiveness, precision, and accommodation you receive from service providers is genuinely exceptional. The problem arises when those same expectations get transferred into personal relationships, when a person begins to relate to their friends, family members, or even injured acquaintances, making voluntary sacrifices with the same set of expectations they would apply to a professional service. The friend in Europe was not a train station attendant. She was a person doing something kind. Those two situations call for completely different responses, and the student in this class did not appear to register the difference. For ESL tutors who encounter students like this, the experience raises a practical question. What do you actually do? You cannot rewrite someone's values in a 25-minute conversation lesson. You are not their therapist, and you are not their moral guide. Your job is to help them communicate in English. But you're also a human being in a real interaction, and pretending that the content of what a student is asking you to help them say has no impact on you is not realistic. The approach that tends to work best is asking clarifying questions early, not to trap the student or make them feel judged, but to genuinely understand the situation before investing your energy in helping them phrase something that may be problematic regardless of how politely it is worded. Polite phrasing does not make an unreasonable request reasonable. It just makes it sound better. And there is a limit to how much a tutor should invest in making something sound better when the underlying content is the issue. If the probing questions reveal that the request is genuinely one-sided or likely to cause harm to the person receiving it, harm in this case being the additional stress and burden placed on an injured person who is already doing too much, it is completely within a tutor's professional rights to note that the challenge may not be linguistic. Sometimes the most honest and useful thing a tutor can say is that the issue is not how the request is phrased, but what is being requested. That feedback will not always be welcomed. The one-star review in this story is evidence of that. But it is honest, and honest feedback, even when it costs you a rating point, is more valuable to both parties than helping someone polish language that is going to damage a friendship regardless of how grammatically correct it is. The larger point for anyone who works in cross-cultural communication is this. Understanding another culture's communication style is important. Learning to read indirectness, to interpret politeness norms, to adjust your own style to meet someone where they are, all of that matters. But cultural sensitivity does not mean accepting every behavior or request as equally valid simply because it comes from a different cultural background. Entitlement is entitlement regardless of the cultural packaging it arrives in. An injured friend sacrificing family time deserves gratitude, not precision scheduling demands. And a tutor who laughs, even accidentally, at the absurdity of the gap between those two things is not failing at cultural sensitivity. They are just human. As for what to do when you encounter a student like this in the future, the answer is to ask your probing questions early, establish what you are actually being asked to help with, and make a calm professional decision about how much of your energy you are willing to invest in that particular request. Cancel early if the session is clearly heading somewhere that is going to cost you more than it gives. Note the student's name for future reference. And if you get a one-star review for being honest, remember that the rating reflects the reviewer's frustration at not getting what they wanted, not an accurate evaluation of what you did or did not do well in that room. Thanks for watching. If you found this helpful or relatable, please subscribe to join my journey toward 2,000 videos. On this channel, I share unfiltered ESL stories. Yes, even the toxic ones, alongside Japanese and Korean language tips, my plants, my pets, and the reality of solo living. If you'd like to support my work and help me build my retirement fund, you can buy a treat for my pets via the link in the description below. Every bit of support helps keep this channel independent and growing. See you in the next one.